when I was in the military, I was very frustrated often by the processes that were in place. And I think I was overly critical actually because I wasn't taking seriously the challenge that the military had, which is, I'm a sort of a college educated officer with some amount. I was a little bit older than the average soldier who might be 18, 19, 20 years old. I
Mm.
was like 21 or 22. Um, and what I remember feeling is just very constrained by the system. And over time, I realized that the military has what I call a lowest common denominator problem, which is they need to build a system that somebody who is not interested in the success of that system could still be a productive member of that system.
Right.
And so, what do you do in that situation? You constrain, control, force compliance. You make sure that people know where the bounds are, and if they go outside of it, they get punished. Um, because the 19-year-old or the 18-year-old who just joined the army because they didn't know what else to do, they may not have the best interests of their own life, much less the unit or everybody else. And so I control them. I make sure they're at PT. I make sure they eat. I make sure they're in formations. I make sure all these things are very controlled, and I get on them when they mess up. Um, what's fascinating is when you look at special forces, they are
They're
the
different.
very different, and it's
Yeah.
different. And the because they're different, the structure around them is different. They have much more leeway now, despite the fact that for I was in a Cav unit in Fort Carson, so it was like we were it's a scout unit, so we would do like small vehicle scouting in warfare and stuff like that, and every day we needed to do PT, and it was at a set time, and it was like this time to this time. Not all special forces units operate that way. In fact, often they have a lot of leeway about when they exercise and how much they exercise. Why? Because in a special forces unit, I trust everyone to exercise on their own and to keep themselves in peak physical condition. And not only that, if they started not doing that, me as a leader, I probably don't even have to address it. My guess is the teammates around them are going to address it with that person because they're like, that's unacceptable. You're lowering the bar. You're lowering the standard for what excellence looks like. You're a Green Beret or it's Navy SEAL or whatever you are. Like, we do not tolerate you sucking at what we're supposed to be good at. And so, despite the fact that there's a lot less rules, the higher autonomy is provided because there's a proven trust there. And when I think about game development, I've often tried to figure out, well, where are we on this? And it's like, and what's interesting also is that I think the system encourages one or the other. And so if you are always building the lowest common denominator system to try to make sure no one screws up, then you get a lot of people who would screw up without that system. But if you build the system that says, look, I give you autonomy, I trust you to be the expert and to take care of yourself and to do the research on becoming better at your craft, and not saying I won't help you with those things, but then I'm more likely to attract people who are going to thrive in that environment. And if you don't, you're going to self-select out, or we're going to remove you. We're going to see that you're not able to operate in this environment, that you're trying to take advantage of the system. And so much of what you've described, even this idea of trust being so foundational to many of these things, pushes towards that idea of, I want to treat my team like special forces. I want to treat them like and it's not the special forces, they don't have to send reports up. They do. They still have to check in. They still have to make sure, they still have to pass their PT test just like I did. But we have a high trust that they're going to pass. That they're out, and if they're not, that they're resolving that issue.
That is a
And
really good analogy. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anyway, a lot of stuff as you were going through it, just it made me think of that, and how do we build systems? Because if you use process as a way to force compliance, you will not get the best work out of creative people, in my opinion.
No,
Um,
no. I mean, it works in factories, things like that, right? If
yep.
you, or in warehouses, but we're not doing that. We're not. I mean, there are sometimes elements of the work that are a little bit like that. Like if you have to
Mm-hmm.
churn out a load of very similar assets,
Yep.
it does become a very, it's a waterfall pipeline kind of process, and it is a bit more closely controlled. But if you're trying to do something that's not that, which is most of what we do, that has some element of creativity, more creativity to it, and ambiguity, you have to be able to improvise. And that's why you have to have smart people who can solve problems, because I can't be there every day to solve every single problem,
Yep.
right? So you need to you need to have people who are good at doing that on their own, trust them to do it, and make sure they're thinking about some of the problems, that maybe they're not thinking about, but give them space. And I often use an analogy. I haven't used it for it as much frequently, but used to use it, which was, I want to give people enough rope that they start feeling it, a little bit choked sometimes, but
Yeah.
I'm not going to let them choke themselves,
Right.
right? Right.
Right.
And because that's how you learn, right? You have
Yeah.
to,
Yeah.
you learn by doing it, and you have to be able to make some mistakes to learn.
Yep.
I just don't want to make one that's going to kill us.
Right. Right.
Right. So, um, yeah, I mean, that's a really, another one I often use is, we're a sports team. We're like a sports team. And
Mm-hmm.
the best sports teams, I mean, they have a plan, but they have to adapt.
Yeah.
It's like being, no battle survives, the battle plan survives the first, 5 minutes.
Contact with the enemy. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
It's a similar thing, right? When you're actually out there, the manager, I mean, in most sports, I think it might be different in maybe American football, maybe because it's a lot more structured, but soccer, rugby, or whatever, your team has to adapt in real time to what's going on.
Yep.
So you need people that build that way. If they just followed every single rule that you gave them in a robotic fashion, you would lose because
Yeah.
the other team would change their strategy accordingly, and they would be stuck. They wouldn't have any way to react.
Yeah.
So
There's an interesting example of this actually. I don't know how many people here are familiar with international football or whatever, but Arsenal is a team in the Premier League.
yeah, yeah.
Not my favorite team either, but one of the things that's interesting is people have been watching them play this year, and over the first half of the season, they scored all these set piece goals, and it was quite impressive. Like they had so many score, and for those who don't know much about that, just means that there's a dead ball situation where the ball is kicked from not moving, and it's like a start of play. And so anyway, they were scoring all these set piece goals, and over the course of the season, I think they've been scoring less and less.
Yeah,
And
I think so.
it's because the other team is responding. They're watching what they're doing, and they're like training their team of, okay, this is what Arsenal does when there's a corner kick, or this is where Arsenal does when there's a free kick over here. And where they're watching and they're learning from that, and they're saying this is how we would better defend against that. And so the same strategy, to your point, just continually applied, is not going to yield the same response or the same results over time because the opponent gets a vote. And that's always the thing in team sports or in warfare is the opponent gets a vote. And in game dev, I think it's like, yeah, we're all on the same team. There's not really an opponent, but in some ways there is. The opponent is the change in the system and what every other studio is doing and adapting to the needs of the player as they change over time. Like all these other things get a vote on whether your work matters or not. You can't just go do it on your own. You're not just somebody who's producing art for art's sake because that was what was in your mind that day. It has to be to a point and to an intention, and that might shift over time. I love what you said too about planning in this because I went through a period again. You were talking earlier about like all the mistakes we make, and I've made so many
Yeah.
mistakes. I've put green on all my sprint reports, right? I've made that mistake, but another one I made was I thought, oh no, I'm going to get in trouble if the plan is wrong, so I'm just not going to have a plan.
Plans are
And
always, Robert.
plans exactly. And what I actually found was I was really insistent on this. I think I almost got fired. But at the end, when I realized I was probably going to get fired if I didn't solve this problem, I was like, okay, well, what would I create? And I created a plan, and it was awful. But now I knew it was awful. And now we could say, well, we thought this was going to take 1 week, and it took 4 weeks. So even if this is bad math, but like I can just multiply my whole plan times 4 and go, oh shoot, I was probably pretty far off. And by the way, that ended up being more accurate than you'd think, even a couple weeks in to doing like a rough check of something like that.
Yeah.
And then over time I actually iterated to the point where I created a highly useful plan that was relatively precise and predicted when something was going to ship. But had to go through that phase of like, oh gosh, like but that idea you said of like, you have the plan's going to be wrong, it's going to change. That's okay. The plan, something else I learned in the military, plan is a common basis for change. It's the thing that we can all start with, and we can say, okay, this is what we think is going to happen. Oh, life changed, like the world changed. Of course it did. But now we know what we're pivoting from. And so we can pivot together instead of kind of starting with nothing and then something changes and we all go, what do we do? And it was like, well, what were you going to do?
Right.
What makes sense to change?
Well, it's you plan often, frequently, and some people find that scary because the old way of doing things, or in fact, a lot of companies, not game companies, tend to not to do this, but the military does this. You're building and you build all the requirements up front, and that takes a
Yep.
massive amount of time.
Yep.
And then you execute, and any kind of change is seen as a failure, and you have to go back to the beginning again.
Yeah.
Right. Well, whereas what we're doing is go, okay, we always have a plan at the beginning. In fact, one of the first things I always do if I'm running something is I will build a high level plan for the whole thing just to see if I think it's in any kind of scope and start making cuts immediately. Like this, this
Yes.
doesn't make any sense. But I know that that's going to be completely wrong in terms of the detail. And people always confuse detail for accuracy. It's like
Yes. Yep.
if I make something super detailed, it's going to be accurate. No,
Right.
in fact, often unless you really know what you're doing, at the big, if you're doing something you've done before, maybe that can be true. But if you're doing something different, that's not going to be true.
Yeah.
So don't, have the smallest amount of detail you need to take the next step,
Yeah.
and try and work that way if you can. But
Yes. Yep.
the details are always going to change, and very rarely has
Yeah.
anything ever been exactly as we envisaged it at the start.
Well, and something I like to say too is when you take that, you do that breakdown of like, here's the stuff, let's break it all down into more and more granular pieces. People think, like you said, more detail, like higher precision means more accuracy. Usually not true, but also it gives you this false sense of confidence of look how much we understand it, and then everything blindsides you, and so you put it all in this giant Gantt chart, and you're like, look at this giant, and then this person's going to be doing, and the extreme example is, oh yeah, I know what artist number 4 is going to be doing 18 months from now, and I'm like, you don't even know if you're going to have a game 18 months, like you know nothing, but you've pretended you do. And I see that still in game development today. And when the plan, like you said, when the plan ends up being wrong, because of course it's wrong, someone panics and goes like, well, we have to plan again. Like, wait, let's go back and plan again. And I've seen that overtake studios that should know better.
I think it's possible to have high level goals and some degree of granularity, like numbers of things that you're aiming for, and hit those.
Yep.
But the details are usually always going to be different. That it's better to have buckets of things you're aiming for and try and fill those buckets up as much as you can. But the details will be different. Because it's too complex. There's too many variables involved for it to be that predictable. But it is a comfort blanket for people. And a lot of production people can become like checklists. Did you do the 400 things that you said on the list? Rather than did you do the 300 most important ones? And are they great? Are they great? Right? That's more important.
Yes.
And
well, this is something else you said. Sorry to interrupt again. What was it? You said something earlier about, it was about scope. One of the things that people don't understand, I think also when they put together estimates and plans, is something so valuable that can come out of that is to realize you're not going to get it all done. And the earlier you know that, the sooner you can start prioritizing and cutting out the things that are least important.
Yeah. Or add more people, or whatever.
Or add more people, exactly. Basically adjust your constraints. But if you don't, if you pretend that the plan is just going to fit and it's all going to be right, and you get people to give you the right answers for estimation, like, hey, how long is that going to take? And by the way, it can't take longer than 2 months. And then the engineer's like, I guess it's going to take 2 months then, right? And it breeds cynicism, but 2, you find out way later that you need to cut a lot of scope. And the problem with that is you probably built a bunch of stuff you would have chosen to cut. Right. And so now you never get that time back. Where the way you were describing it is, if I can get a rough but accurate plan, now I can start making calls well in advance about, hey, what is it we're not going to get to, or we might not get to, and how do we make sure we do the most important things?
Yeah, I agree. There is a little bit of nuance to it, though, because I also think that people have a tendency either to be wildly optimistic or wildly conservative, and you don't want either of those, right? Yeah. Like if everyone's conservative, then you're not going to push. So I want to have slightly aggressive goals. Or because I think then you're pushing for things. but not unrealistic goals.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like if everything goes super well, but then if I get 80% or 90% of it, then I'm happy. Right?
Right.
It's but because if you don't push people, then it's the Stanley Kubrick thing, right? If you're not pushing people to some degree, if everyone's just comfortable,
Yeah.
you're not always doing your best work. You need some sense of urgency, and
Right.
at least sometimes, right?
Yeah.
So it's about finding a balance of that. Some companies go way too far, right, and just crunch everybody all the time, and that can create great products, but there's a massive human cost to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, um, it's important to not just settle for
Yeah.
the status quo. You need a little bit of push.
What do they say? Tons of stress is not good, but no stress is also not good. You need that sort of you need some level of stress to drive the action, the creativity. Like again, creativity thrives in the constraints. And by the way, I've
Right.
worked like a lot of the majority of my experience in game development was at a place that was very, very flush with capital. And you would see teams that could kind of go off, and they kind of had unlimited time and resources to do whatever it was, and it rarely ended well. And it was just too much open space and too little pressure to actually get anything done. I liked what you said, aggressive but not unrealistic. Like we're trying to find
Right.
that line between, hey, let's target aggressive but not unrealistic, and if we miss, we'll be okay because it was aggressive. But I don't also want people just thinking, "Oh, you got all the time in the world, noodle around on every little thing you ever do," because that'll cause massive waste.
Yeah, it's often not a good idea to have infinite time,
Yeah.
for the reasons you said. But I find the best pressures are the people, the kind of people I want to work with are the people who put pressure on themselves.
Yes, that's that ownership piece.
Right, exactly. I mean, I don't want people that are panicking about everything, right?
Right.
But
Yep.
they have a sense of this needs to be good, and I'm going to make it good, and I'm going to do everything I can within reason to to make it as good as I possibly can, and be under that kind of sense of self pressure. Um,
Yeah.
then you normally have a chance of making something really good.
Yeah.
Um, if it's coming from above, it tends not to. I mean, it tends not to work after too long of a period of time, right? People just get sick of
Yeah.
it.
This is something Aaron said once when he was on a project. It was a large project, um, and he said he would. It was basically the team had been pushed and pushed and pushed by the stakeholders, and every time they'd be like, "Oh, it's not coming fast enough. Work faster. Work harder. Work faster. Work harder." And he described it. It was as if these people were like pushing the go faster button because at some point in their career that had worked, but now they just kept like smashing that button until the button was broken. It wasn't doing it, but
Right.
they didn't know what else to do. This is what I do as a leader, right? I smash the go faster button. And it's like, yeah, like you said, if it's only ever leadership trying to drive that, it will actually become something that people become cynical about and bitter about and frustrated with.
Yeah.
Um, how do you create that environment where instead it's the individuals that are like, I'm driving this, and some of that's hiring and picking the right people, and
Yeah.
some of that's the system you create. I wanted
Uh,
to jump because I know we're yeah. Go ahead.
Just one thing. I
Yeah,
also I
yeah, yeah.
think about detail. I think it's important to understand the pipelines that you use for building things in detail.
Yes,
Given that they will change too over time. But
yes,
if you can understand those things, you can optimize them and make them and reduce friction during that process, and that does
yes.
make things more efficient.
Yes.
Um,
Well, and I love it because if you can't see that whole system, this is perhaps one of the traps. You sub-optimize.
right.
You're constantly sub-optimize. Like, oh, I made this more efficient. Yeah, but that's not the bottleneck. Who cares? Whereas if you can see that whole system, okay, this is the bottleneck. I shouldn't spend any time optimizing anything else unless if I can optimize that because it doesn't matter.
Right.
And unless if I can eventually get to the point where I have fewer people on it or something like that. But broadly, it focuses you to see that full picture. Yeah, I completely
And
agree.
that's why you need people with an engineering mindset, not necessarily programmers, but people who can see a system. It's
Yeah,
also
systems thinking.
it's signal flow, right? You have an input and you have an output, and what's in between, and
Yes.
and, and understanding that is incredibly important. And if you don't,
Yeah.
you will have problems.
I love it. Dude, it's so good. Okay, so
Hmm.
I want to jump topics here, and again, let me know when you need to go because I'm enjoying this conversation too much right now. But I wanted to ask you, because you said at the very beginning, I have made a ton of mistakes, and now I try not to make them and try to help other people not make them, and I can very much resonate with that. From my own side and my own experience, at both in the military and in game development as a leader, I had all kinds of dumb things I did, and they taught me a lot. In game and software development, we spend so much time estimating, and it often feels like a burden that just takes a bunch of time but doesn't really add much value. My name is Benjamin Karsage. I've created a course called Advanced Estimation for Game and Software Development. This is actually something people out there asked for when I was looking at what would be helpful to you, what course could I build. Estimation was the number one thing you picked, and I can understand why. Everywhere I've gone in our industry and in software generally, I see teams struggling with estimation, fighting with a sense of false precision, and generally going through the motions rather than really getting value out of all the time they're spending. And in my time, both in the military, in software development, and game development, I've been able to successfully predict the completion of large projects. I've seen other people do the same, and so I know it is possible. If you want to be doing that for your team, if you want to be advancing your understanding of estimation and how it can help you, this course is for you. A quick overview of what we cover. We start by discussing the state of estimation today, why it's so challenging, and why are we all doing it and continuing to do it even though it doesn't seem to add that much value. Second, we talk about calibration, how we can become better calibrated estimators and train others to be the same. Third, we talk about how to get ready to estimate. Who should be estimating? What are we actually estimating? How do we set up ourselves to succeed and to avoid the individual biases and fallacies that prevent our estimates from being good? Finally, at least for early access, we talk about tools, techniques, the approach. What are the ways that you can actually create estimates that add value? And when should you not use those techniques and use others instead? In the future, we're going to be releasing even more modules where we cover things like how to estimate things that aren't just how long a project might take, but to think about money and resources and so many other things that we end up estimating, value and whatnot. The 6th and 7th modules talk about small and large scale estimation and really try to make all of what we've talked about so far practical. And those modules will be coming in the future. For right now, we're focusing on those first 4. And as a result, we're keeping this course in early access at a lower price. As more modules come out, that price will go up. So get it today while it is as low as it'll be, and you will get all the future sections as well as those first 4. It's already 15 hours of content and more than 20 worksheets, templates, and examples for you to take away. I also interject stories from my own experiences, both failures and successes, of how estimation has gone well and poorly and what you might be able to learn from those things. So there's a lot of tools here, there's a lot of resources. This is a problem we're all facing because we all spend so much time doing this, and I think we get way too little value out of it. I think we could be spending less time and getting more value and really helping our teams succeed, creating the software, the games that will really please our audience and players. If that's something you're interested in, check out the course.